Hi, and welcome to another episode of Starship Gaming. Before we get started, I cannot stress enough, do not forget to subscribe. It really helps out, it helps the channel grow, and if every single person who watched this video that isn't subscribed yet takes a moment to just go ahead and smash that subscribe button, it would really help out. And of course, if you like the video, give it a thumbs up, and when you subscribe, don't forget to hit the bell. It will let you know when we release more awesome videos. And of course, if you haven't seen our previous episodes, take a moment to go back and watch some of those, especially our more recent ones in the past 2 or 3 months. So go ahead, give it a try. So let's jump right into today's topic. Now, this is somewhat of a controversial subject, but I get this question asked quite a bit by fellow collectors. And one of them is the Atari 2600 really worth collecting for, or is it even worth anything? So, a little backstory about the Atari 2600. It was released in 1977 and is credited for popularizing home video games. It enjoyed some success through all the way till 1992, which that's a pretty long run, but yeah. It was around for a long time. Of course, during those years from 1977 to 1992, it had several revisions, and there were a lot of games. A lot. And with those games, there was a lot of them that were just kind of unlicensed, meaning they were not released by Atari themselves. They were not first party. They were just kind of thrown out on the market. And because there was so much of these games out there, it literally caused a crash in the market in 1983. Not only so many games, but there was a lot of games that weren't very good quality. The list goes on when we come to that, because honestly, there was a lot of Atari 2600 games that weren't very good quality compared to some of the first party stuff that was coming out. Of course, there was some first party stuff that wasn't, up to par, but we'll save that for another episode, perhaps. But as we all know, the Atari 2600 was dethroned by Nintendo by 1986. And yeah, that's pretty much Atari. It lasted until 1992. They had the smaller model, which everyone has nicknamed the Junior model, or the Atari 2600 Junior, because it's just a little itty bitty Atari. But yeah, it was one of the big names out there at one point. And yeah, but for collectors like us, Atari has a different thing in terms of value. Let me explain. Like I said, there's quite a bit of Atari 2600 titles out there, literally hundreds, if not thousands of titles, just from everything. But in terms of value, there's very few that are actually worth quite a bit. You have stuff like Chase the Chuck Wagon, just to name a few. But very few of them are worth more, just as a standalone cartridge, are worth more than $5 at most. Maybe $10. Of course, if you have the box, you may have a little bit there, but there's been a lot of debate on whether the Atari 2600 console and games are actually worth anything. In dealing with Atari collectibles in general, I should say Atari 2600 stuff, games and whatnot, people, and this is just kind of a pet peeve of mine, but there's people out there who they find an Atari 2600 and they instantly think they're worth several $100s just because they found one in their attic or whatever, and they'll throw them up on eBay or something and be like, rare, 35, 40 years old or something like that. And I'm here to tell you today, at least on this first part, then we'll move into the games themselves, but on the consoles, they're not really worth a whole lot than what you think. They're not worth, out of the box, loose, they're not worth hundreds of dollars, let alone $100. out of the box, a complete Atari with everything. Let's say, not counting the Heavy Sixer, because the Heavy Sixer is harder to find, but just say you have a plain Atari wood grain, 4-button, we'll say, or 4-switch, whatever. The most a complete one is worth is about $50 to $60 complete out of the box. That's really it. And some even go for less than that. I've seen some online sell complete as cheap as $25 or even $30. But I hate to be the party pooper, but facts are facts about these things actually selling, Now, if you actually have one of the Heavy Sixers, it is worth a lot more. Complete one has been known to go anywhere from $75 to $100, sometimes even more, but a majority of them go between that price range. And then you have what they call the Light Sixer, which is 6 buttons, but it's, the later model. Wood grain, of course. Some of those have been known to go as much as $90 to $100, but in reality, they're more closer to the $50 to $60 range typically. I've never seen any of them in my years of collecting and going out everywhere and whatnot. I've never seen one sell for no more than $60 in a Light Sixer, and that's been, in recent years, the past 2 or 3 years. And that's, complete, of course, with controllers, paddles, the power adapter and whatnot. And then, of course, you have the all-black Atari, which has been known as the Vader model, or, some people have called it the Darth Vader model because of being all-black. Those usually go between the $50 to $60 price range complete. Those are a little bit more common that I come across than the wood grains for some reason, especially in the area I live in. I see more of the Darth Vader models than any other console. I don't know why. I guess it was where I live in, back in the 80s, this was kind of an area where it was low income, so a lot of people couldn't afford an Atari up until by the time this model came out. I think it was 82, 83. I do see quite a bit of wood grains, but for whatever reason, the black Darth Vader models, they show up more, and I really don't know why. And last but not least, you have the Atari 2600 Junior model, as it's been dubbed, which came out, I believe, around 86, 87, sometime around then, and it was sold straight up until 92, and I believe in some places as late as 1995. I say that because, for reference, I don't remember it myself, but I have a friend who grew up in the late 80s, early 90s, and he was telling me about Big Lots. If you're not familiar with Big Lots, it's like a discount. They take in liquidated stuff that other stores couldn't sell and they get rid of. But he remembers seeing them in a Big Lots store for $39.99 a piece as late as probably November of 1995, just because they wanted to get rid of these things. And he said they were selling games for anywhere from $1.99 a piece brand new, all the way up to $6.99 for some of the more popular titles. And I think that's rather interesting that they were around that long. I mean, on an unrelated note pertaining to Big Lots, I remember walking into a Big Lots in 2001, summer 2001, and they had a bunch of the Pikachu edition Nintendo 64 consoles, just right on an end cap, and I think they were just $99 brand new at the time. And then they had an aisle that had nothing but Nintendo 64 games. I'm guessing it was from a store that went out of business, and they just had all this Nintendo 64 stuff, and Big Lots ended up with it, and I regret not getting one. I asked my dad, I said, will you get me one? And he said, son, you don't need one. You have a PlayStation 1. And I'm like, okay. So that was that. I mean, I already owned a Nintendo 64 at that point. PlayStation 1 was the newest console I'd gotten 2 years prior, but it would have been cool to have a Pikachu edition Nintendo 64, because now you can't hardly find them. But, like I said, back on the subject of Atari 2600, the Atari 2600 console itself is not really worth collecting. It's more of a curiosity from an era of gaming that kind of really where it started. You know, everything started in terms of, you know, popularity games. Of course, if we want to go back to where it all started, we'll have to go back to the Odyssey and the Odyssey 2 and all that jazz. But Atari was where gaming was really popularized. Now, as for the games themselves, it's kind of a mixed bag. Some are worth a little bit of money, and then you have some that are just completely, you know, they're so common that they're practically worthless. They make better coasters for your soda than they actually do for playing. Like, for example, Missile Command. I see that game, like, every time there's an Atari for sale, there's almost always 99.5% of the time, there's almost always a copy of Missile Command with it. And almost a copy, like almost every time also, a copy of Asteroids. Yeah. Now, one that is common, but I don't really see it as much as I used to, Centipede, which I will admit, Centipede is my favorite Atari 2600 game. Is it worth anything? No, not really, but it's still my favorite Atari 2600 game to play when I do feel compelled to play an Atari 2600, which as of the past 5 years hasn't been a whole lot. And then you have some games that are worth something for I can't even talk, for the sake of being worth something. Like, for example, one of the games that was blamed for the crash of 1983, E.T. the Extraterrestrial. It's worth a little bit of money. Not a whole lot, but a little bit. Typically, when I do see it for sale, usually between, on the low end, $5. On the high end, this is loose copy prices, by the way. $5 on the low end, $15 on the high end for a loose copy. Box copies, I've seen them go as much as $30 to $40 in some cases. Sometimes not even that, sometimes $20. I guess it depends on, you know, how attached someone feels to their particular boxed copy of E.T., but, you know, whatever floats their goat there. Yes, I did say goat, not boat, just to clarify. So, bully for Vam. And then you have some of the more absurd ones, like Chase the Chuck Wagon, which is literally a game by a dog food company, which that one's worth quite a bit. And then you have some of the stranger ones, like KoolAid Man, which I'm actually sitting here looking at my collection right now, and I do have a copy of KoolAid Man, so, oh yeah. I can imagine a kid in 1983, like, going into a grocery store and buying all of these packets of Kool-Aid just to cut the proof of purchase out and send it in to the company to get their game, and then they let all this Kool-Aid go to waste. For shame, for shame. A good man does not let Kool-Aid go to waste, because Kool-Aid is awesome, and there's quite a few discontinued flavors I wish they would bring back. The rarest game you can get for the Atari 2600 is a game called Air Raid, which in the box, about $30,000 to $35,000 is what they've typically sold for, and in a loose copy going for nearly $10,000. Wow. Of course, the second rarest is a game called Lockjaw, which I actually have a copy in my collection. I ended up getting it at a yard sale back like 10 years ago for probably about $1, but loose it's worth about $1,000. So, cool. But other than the select few, quite a bit of Atari games are, well, to put it lightly, crap. There's nothing really that high quality with Atari, and of course the newer generation, that's of course the generation born 2000 and after doesn't really appreciate the Atari 2600 like the older generation has. Of course, you know, the well, thing about Atari is the majority of them just aren't worth anything, and honestly, unless you plan on collecting the rare titles or the box titles, the Atari 2600 cartridges themselves are just not worth collecting, really, unless you are a hardcore Atari fan or you're a completionist. But if you're just a casual collector who just wants to, you know, collect for the sake of collecting, it really isn't going to be your cup of tea. If you're going to collect, or I should say going to be a casual collector, I would stick more to like the, well, honestly, I would stick more to like Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Nintendo 64, if you're going to be a casual retro collector, because right now those are the ones that are really worth collecting for. A lot of the older consoles like Atari 2600 and television, stuff like that, a lot of them aren't really worth as much as some of the more, you know, 80s, 90s Nintendo stuff. With that said, though, one of the reasons why I think the Atari 2600 in recent years has really gone down in value compared to what it was is thanks to the Atari Flashback, which, if you're not familiar with the Atari Flashback, what it is it's this console, or I should say this dedicated console that has like a certain set amount of games built in, which I must admit, I've been guilty over the years of buying one of these, or I should say in the past 15, 20 years, I've been guilty of owning at least 3 or 4 of these, actually 4 of these, yeah, just for the sake of, you know, having one complete in box, having it in the collection. They're not really worth a whole lot, but they're cool to have on the shelf. But with that said, we'll recap the Atari 2600 consoles. Not really worth collecting unless you're a hardcore Atari collector. Same for the cartridges. Unfortunately, if you're going for value here, it's just not worth collecting for. Of course, if you're a completionist or you're a hardcore collector or a hardcore Atari collector, you'll want to own one. But if you're going to collect one for the sake of value, the value really isn't there unless you have some of the more rare titles. So before we go, I'm going to ask you a question. You let me know. What would you like to see in our next episode, or I should say our next discussion episode? Would you like to see a game review? Would you like to see something PC or retro PC related? Or would you like to have an episode where I discuss my adventure at Big Lots and the Nintendo 64 Pikachu? I'll go more in depth about it than I did in this episode, if you decide, you know, to do that. Pending that you watch the very end of the episode. Of course, if you watch to the very end of the episode, let us know in the comments. And in the very next episode where I do a discussion like this, I'll give you a shout out for your support. So, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to like, hit that subscribe button, really helps out, helps the channel grow. And don't forget to hit the bell. It will let you know when we make more awesome videos. And don't forget to stay tuned for more episodes coming soon. So, until next time, I will see ya.